Blog Talk Radio.
Are you curious of what may go bump in the night? Or shadowy secrets that may never come to light? Then tune in to Disclosure Now. I'm your host, the Pied Piper, co-hosted by Texas Rebel. Tune in and let's get real. Brought to you by the Enlightenment Evolution Network. The opinions, commentary, and views that are expressed here at Disclosure Now or the guest of the show are not necessarily reflections of the view of the Enlightenment Evolution Network. Hello, thank you for tuning in to Disclosure Now. I am your host, the Pied Piper. Texas Rebel will not be with us tonight. Tonight we got a wonderful show. We're going to have David Chace on. He is an ET contactee. He's a researcher, and he's also an illustrator specializing in the study of alien beings. He's done this for over 20 years, and we're just waiting for him to come in, and we'll start that conversation. Right now, I'd like to share something with you. I have a few special abduction stories that I find are very, very credible, and they're very interesting. So, Charles Hickson, then 42, was fishing from an old pier in the Pascagoula River with a friend, Calvin Parker Jr., on the night of October 11th, 1973. Hickson claimed that they heard a zipping sound. Basically, they were abducted by these robot-looking entities. They exited from the craft. Although they were gray humanoids just over 5 feet tall, they were otherwise of another type of reported craft. Each entity lacked a neck, exhibited only slits for eyes and mouth, had a nose and ears that were sharply pointed protrusions, which is very interesting because not very many abduction things are like that. Not very many entities that are explained in that manner. The men had apparently not been seen by people on the heavily traveled nearby highway, Randall 2001. There had been other UFO sightings in the area, including the night in question. The UFOs were variously described. One was like a helicopter object. Okay. Another is the Travis Walton story, which many of you are familiar with. And somebody that knows much more than that on the subject would be David. And at this point, I would like to introduce David Chace and start the conversation. How are you tonight, David?
Can you hear me?
Yes, I can.
Very good. Well, I'm doing just fine. I'm glad we got the Skype thing figured out.
Yes, sir. Absolutely.
All right.
So yeah, if you could just explain a little bit about yourself and what you do, and some of the things you've investigated.
Okay. Well, I'm an illustrator. Basically, I talk to experiencers of people who have seen an alien or had some kind of abduction experience or a contact, or sometimes someone who's just had a vision during meditation. But basically anyone who can give me a description of what an alien being or UFO occupant or extraterrestrial looks like from their personal experience. And I guess I got started back in the early 90s or back in the late 80s. So in mid-80s, my dad took me to a lecture by Tom Gates of the Mutual UFO Network, and Tom Gates presented a bunch of information about UFO sightings, and then he closed his talk with the Barney and Betty Hill case. And I was fascinated with that because I thought, well, here's someone who's actually seen, he talked about Betty Hill as actually having seen an alien being. and I was interested in what an alien being would look like. And then, in '87, there was Communion and Intruders both came out. And in Communion, Whitley Strieber described the beings, the grays and the little blue beings. And then Bud Hopkins' book Intruders had many illustrations of the grays. And then in the early 90s, I actually discovered that there was a group, UFO Contact Center International, that was meeting within a short drive from my home. So I started attending the monthly meetings of Eileen Garut's group, UFO Contact Center International in Federal Way, Washington. And I met an experiencer named Garnett Doonan, and she described to me a light being that she was interacting with named Estartlia, and she also described reptilian beings. And I worked with Garnett over the next few years to do drawings of those beings, and I just started attending MUFON meetings and other UFO discussion groups, and started meeting a lot of experiencers and just drawing the beings that they've seen.
Okay, well, you just mentioned the reptilians for a second. I have a question for you. Why are reptilians looked at in an overall dislike or fear? There's like a stigma attached to the reptilians. Can you talk about that for just a second?
Certainly. I think there is. Well, I've seen on YouTube there are actually some people who are really trying to put a lot of fear of the reptilians into people. Saying, if you ever see this kind of being, run in the other direction, or trying to frighten people into believing that they're taking our children and eating us in mass quantities down underground or something like that. And I don't know why. I think for some people they just make a good bad guy. That it's like people want to have someone to blame everything wrong in the world on, and we see that our economic system is obviously, we have the 1% who has like something like 90-something% of the wealth, and then we got the 99% who have much less, and so whenever you see kind of this sort of what looks like a social injustice, people look for someone to blame, and sometimes it seems like they want to blame something that's not human, and the reptilians, I guess maybe because of the story of the serpent in the garden and the idea that the serpent is responsible for humankind's downfall from grace, and also I think that for some people there's an innate fear of reptiles, or at least snakes, because perhaps it's due to the fact that our ancestors often, many of them would maybe get killed by venomous snakes or large constrictors back when our ancestors lived in Africa hundreds of thousands of years ago. So there are a variety of reasons that the reptiles have been kind of vilified, but I think it's definitely something that I want to do something about, because they don't deserve the reputation that they've gotten.
Right. Well, you mentioned Astaria. Am I saying that correctly?
Estartlia, and we spell that. Yeah, I'll give you a spelling. Is Estartleah. Estartlia.
Estartlia. So, can you tell us a little bit about Estartlia and what kind of an encounter that was?
Yes. Okay. Estartlia is about 6.5 feet tall or so, but she actually levitates a few inches above the ground. I don't think Garnett's ever seen her walk on the ground, and so when she's levitating, she's more like 7 feet. That's how she looks, and back in the late 80s to the late 90s, for that whole period, Garnett and her daughters were having visitations from Estartlia and little sparkles of light and other beings connected with Estartlia. When Estartlia would come into the apartment, there would be a certain place where there would be kind of like a pastel-colored mist, a glowing mist of light with little sparkles would appear, and it would kind of swirl around, and then it would fade away, and then Estartlia would just float through into the room as if stepping out from behind a curtain or coming through a crack in the fabric of the air. And Estartlia is very elongated in appearance. For those who are familiar with what the tall grays look like, they have the very kind of pointed chin and or at least a sort of a narrow chin and slanted almond-shaped eyes. And Estartlia is very much like that, but more elongated than most of them. But she's not gray at all. She's kind of a very pale, almost a white, maybe just a touch of a fleshy color, and with hints of blue veins under the skin. But she glows from within with a bright white light. So she's always glowing, emitting light, and she has a beautiful blue iris with actually a blue vertical slit pupil in the center, and then her hair, which we think may be actually a wig, is kind of an Egyptian cut wig, like you've seen pictures of Cleopatra, which is kind of straight across the front and then it hangs down on the side, and it's kind of a frizzy white. Looks like a wig, and then Estartlia wears kind of like a gown, like a soft gown that covers her body, and then her hands are visible, and the hands have 4 fingers with no thumb, and the fingers have kind of like a round pad at the tip of each finger. But apparently, because the way her fingers can bend, she doesn't actually need a thumb, and Garnet has felt in Estartlia's presence a feeling of unconditional love that's very powerful, just feeling accepted and loved. So it's a very positive experience. And the question is, what is Estartlia's ancestry or relation? She has the vertical slit pupils, which is what people describe for the majority of the reptilians. And she has a nictitating membrane, which is like a second eyelid that various animals on Earth have. And, of course, some of the reptilians have been described as having this nictitating membrane as well. So it's possible she has a reptilian connection, although Garnet likes to think it might be more feline, which is also a possibility. But in any case, Estartlia is basically similar to a tall gray, but very, very benevolent feeling about her.
Okay, well, you mentioned that she kind of came through some light and stuff. Now, is she an interdimensional being?
I think it would be fair to call her an interdimensional being. Garnet's understanding is that actually when she comes through, she may be coming through this space colony that Garnet has been taken to before. So there's somewhere deep out in space, there's this space colony, which is it's just a multi-layered structure with domes and tubes and things look like buildings and hangar bays and so forth, and small saucers going in and out of it or docking with these tubes. And wherever that is, somewhere out in the galaxy or even in intergalactic space for all we know, with the interdimensional travel and whatever, distance may not mean anything to them. Estartlia seems to be able to come from wherever she comes and enter Garnet's apartment just like that. So I think it's fair to call that interdimensional. On top of that, Garnet has seen Estartlia when Garnet had an out-of-body experience, and Estartlia looks the same in the out-of-body state as she does in the physical, in the flesh state, and it's even possible that in some sense she is taking her physical body and entering an astral realm with the physical body. So that would definitely lend itself to the idea of her being interdimensional as well. But interdimensional is not an exact term. You know, it's kind of just a popular term we use to describe some of the capabilities that some of these beings seem to have.
So, how many total? Yes, how many total? Basically, stories have you collected, and off the eyewitness, how many illustrations have you done?
I could not count. I know that about a year ago, I actually went through and made a list of the names of people I knew who had seen reptilians, and I came up with a list of over 50 names. And of course, my research is largely focused on the reptilians because that's the type of being that I'm most interested in. Visually, I think they're far more interesting than the Greys. The Greys are pretty plain looking by comparison. They're just a simple humanoid with, just plain gray skin and whatnot. The reptilians have scales, they have coloration, they have musculature and bone structures. They're very, very interesting to look at. And so over 50 cases of people who've seen reptilians, and by this point it's probably another couple of dozen. I've met dozens of people, dozens and dozens of people who've seen Greys or hybrids or other kinds of beings. So a lot.
Okay. Well, I have another question here, but I wanted to state this real quick. When I'm talking, we can hear it on your side. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to mute you, and then after I ask a question, give it like 3 seconds, and then give your response if that's fine.
Okay. I can mute myself too. I have a mute button, so I can do that while you're speaking as well.
Okay. Yeah. Go ahead and do that then. But I guess my next question was going to be, since you've done so many, what's the commonalities between the contactee reports or the patterns that you have found over time that fit together and give you some sort of clue what's actually happening?
Well, the commonalities, basically I'm finding the same stuff Bud Hopkins was finding, at least as far as, hybridization seems to be a major factor that particularly with the Greys, they're interested in basically creating hybrids. So women are seemingly impregnated for a period of anywhere from a couple weeks to a couple months, and then the fetus is taken. That's one of the patterns. The experiences tend to happen during missing time. They may have a conscious sighting of an entity, and then there's a period of missing time, or they may simply have a period of missing time. But with the reptilians, I find, I guess the most common things that I'm finding are the descriptions of the reptilians. Very often people will describe the reptilian as being about 7 feet tall. They'll say the color is maybe a dark greenish gray or greenish brown color, and it'll have a ridge down the forehead, muscular build, claws or talons on the fingers, some webbing between the fingers. It'll have either something like a turtle shell or breastplate covering the chest, or in other cases it'll have wide horizontal scales like the ventral scales on a snake's belly. And some cases it has a tail, some cases it doesn't. So as well as commonalities, there's also variations. But definitely among the descriptions, there are a lot of common features reported.
Okay. Well, you mentioned something there, 2 things. You mentioned the missing time, which would refer to, basically, which could be time travel. And what do you think of that? Do you think they're time? Obviously, they can manipulate our minds, and that's another thing I wanted to ask you about. When they project this feeling of love and unconditional benevolence, could that be a ruse?
Well, that's an excellent question. To address that issue of the feeling of love, And I'm going to have to say that I leave it to each individual experiencer to determine for themselves, based on their own examination of their feelings and their experience and their memories, whether they believe that was genuine or whether it was a ruse. And certainly Bud Hopkins, he talked about a case in which a woman was lying on a table, and they were doing some kind of uncomfortable procedure to her, and she became upset, and apparently they do not like to work on people when you get too upset or uncomfortable. So then this tall being comes over to her and stares into her eyes, or puts that hand on her head, and then she feels this feeling of unconditional love. She loves this being incredibly, and she feels the love from the being, and then she calms down, and then the being walks away, and then she starts to get uncomfortable again, and then starts to get upset, and then the being comes back and repeats the whole thing, and that leads you to think that it's something of it's just a trick to calm the person in order so that they can work on them. I have a friend named Bridget who was back in the early 90s, was interacting with a reptilian that she nicknamed Captain. Captain's about 7.5 feet tall. He's very muscular, very dark brown or chocolatey colored scales, almost black he looks sometimes. And there was one time when Captain was letting Bridget examine his body. He was like showing Bridget his arms, and she was like feeling the skin on the inside of his arms, and she was looking at his hands, and she was commenting that he has this delicate webbing between his fingers, but then he has these sharp talons, and so isn't he worried about like injuring his webbing? And Captain laughed and thought that was just hilarious, but it's in a very friendly attitude. He's always a good humored laugh with him, and basically he wasn't concerned about damaging his webbing. He's apparently they have the dexterity; they really don't have to worry about that. After she examined Captain told her, "Well, look, my feet are the same," and she looked at his feet, and between his toes he had webbing as well. And I guess, let's see, Bridget, at some point Captain basically asked, what do you like me? What do you feel about the way I look? And she said that you are the most beautiful creature I've ever seen, because as some of the, if you're like me, you can appreciate the beauty of a reptile, the scales, the coloration, all the details in the musculature and so forth. And Captain, as reptiles go, is incredibly beautiful. And as soon as Bridget accepted him and said, "Yes, you are that beautiful," she felt this unconditional love come from him. Just flooded into her, waves of love and total of acceptance of who she was, and it was overwhelming. And it was something that, even though she'd never experienced this kind of love from a human being before that she can recall in her life, there was something familiar about this, as if at some point during her existence she'd felt this love before. But in any case, Bridget, in the subsequent years, has been told by people that, oh, you were mind controlled, and he doesn't really care about you. That was just mind control. But she's questioned it. She's looked at her own feelings. She's looked at her interactions with Captain, and she does feel that in that case that love was completely genuine. So ultimately, I have to leave it up to each experiencer to look at their own memories and experience and decide for themselves whether it is a ruse or whether the love they felt from that being was genuine.
Well, do you think, Do you think that the mind manipulation, do you think that's on a psychic level? Do you believe that's in a technological level, like it's a technological something happening that they can't detect? Or do you believe that they are communicating psychically, so to speak?
Well, I do think it's what you call psychic. It is telepathy, and you can say, well, everything like that has to have some kind of physiological mechanism. David Chace, who's a professor of history and a researcher on abductions, he generally refers to it as neurological engagement. He likes to use a kind of a more mechanistic explanation, but it is what you call telepathy. And so they can manipulate your thoughts or put their own thoughts into your mind or pick up on your thoughts remotely. I believe that's how when it's basically just an extension of telepathy. Telepathy can simply be hearing words in your head, or it could be actually the being kind of almost takes over your body and you feel what they're feeling, and your thoughts, it's like their thoughts become your thoughts. And the communication, they can even know what you're going to say or do, like seconds before you say it. So there's just different levels of telepathy. So there is a psychic aspect to it. But it could be maybe telepathy is in a sense technology, and we use these definitions, these concepts of technology versus psychic and how we think about things, but at some point that stuff probably all blends together.
Yeah, at some point it's almost like magic. Like if we brought the art technology, a tablet back 1,000 years ago, they would think that was magic. They wouldn't understand. Now, here's a question for you. I know that you've done many of these eyewitness testimonials and you've investigated these claims. In your experience researching, what do you get more of, signals or noise from the eyewitnesses? And explain what that is.
All right. Well, that's a great observation. The question is, how do I know someone's not lying to me? How do I know... how do I know they're not deluded about what they've experienced, or it's just their imagination, or they're suffering from schizophrenia and it's some kind of random hallucination related to that? And basically, I talk to a lot of people, and I look for the patterns and the things that are consistent from one case to another. I listen to my intuition. How do I feel? How does this person's communication with me make me feel? Do they have some ulterior motive in telling me this story? And the signal I think drowns out the noise. The noise is those little, the occasional person who might be lying or who is psychologically disturbed in some way and wants to push a belief system onto me. But those cases are not that much of an issue. You just kind of have to trust your own intuition and look for the commonalities and look for, well, this person's reporting something that these 5 other people have reported, and then you can say, well, that's probably part of the signal. If someone is reporting something that's the first time you've heard it, and if it's also someone you just kind of have that feeling in your stomach about, like, something's not right, they're trying to push something on me, then maybe that's noise. So basically, I do think it's only by talking to a lot of experiencers that you can build up kind of an idea of what the signal is and filter out the noise. And so I don't worry too much about interacting with people who might be hoaxers or who might be trying to deceive me, because I don't base my whole belief or understanding of what's going on just one particular case.
Okay. Well, I researched a few of your cases, and one of them the female was woken up, but she was having a dream beforehand, and an entity came to her in a different shape, and it was stuff like that. My question would be, how would a person decipher if it's like a sleep paralysis moment, or if something is actually happening, especially if it starts off in a dream? And the second part of that question, I guess, would be, do you believe that's where like some urban legends or some myths come for, like the incubus, the succubus, fairies, leprechauns, and stuff like that? Do you think that could play into it or explain it?
Yeah, well, the question about what we call sleep paralysis or hypnopompic or hypnagogic hallucinations or hypnopompic dreams, that's an important question, and that's certainly the main thing the skeptics, debunkers, use to explain away all close encounter and abduction cases, as they talk about, well, this person had a sleep paralysis experience, and then maybe they talk to a hypnotherapist who somehow created a false memory based on their ideas and the sleep paralysis experience. And that is something that needs to be looked at. Is there are certainly parallels between sleep paralysis and the what we call the standard bedroom visitation that often is the onset of an abduction experience. I myself had a sleep paralysis experience when I was in college back in 1992. I was lying in my bed one afternoon. I looked at the mirror, which was on the back of the door next to the foot of my bed, and in the mirror I saw. Basically, the mirror would have been showing me what was across from me on the other side of the room next to my desk. And standing in front of my desk in the mirror, I saw the reflection of a roughly 6-foot-tall shadow person. It was basically looked like simply a humanoid figure shaped like a man. It wasn't wearing a hat or a hood or anything like that. The face, I was studying the face to try to see, are there eyes, are there features? No, it would just look like smudges of charcoal on black construction paper. It was just almost featureless. And so I was thinking, okay, is this an alien that has just abducted me and is returning me? And if it's an alien, why doesn't it look like a gray? Because certainly at that point in the early 90s, I was reading Whitley Strieber's and David Jacobs' books, so I was certainly familiar with what an abduction is supposed to look like in that sense. So I tried to turn to face the being, and at that point I discovered, wait, I'm paralyzed. My body is not turning. I can't move. And at that point I got scared because, okay, there's a strange being apparently standing in the room with me, and I'm unable to move. It seemed like a few moments passed, and I discovered, okay, I can move. I don't see the being in the mirror, and then I looked, and it's not there on the opposite side of the room. So whatever was there was gone. And, to this day, I do believe that's connected with the dream state in some way. It's like that sleep paralysis is explained basically as when your brain shuts your body off from moving. And that's because when we're in a dream, if you actually got up and physically acted out what you were doing in the dream, you would be liable to hurt yourself. So your brain has a way of paralyzing yourself. And so and then the idea is then you can see dream imagery superimposed over waking consciousness. However, I've talked to people who've had out-of-body travel and so forth, and they find that the sleep paralysis state is actually a perfect state to enter into, from which to leave their body, and it is kind of a gateway to paranormal experiences. So I'm not going to say that shadow being I saw was just a figment of my imagination. It could be that state is one in which we are able to perceive non-physical beings that we don't ordinarily perceive. And it's just the brain's mechanism for doing that is the same mechanism that generates hallucinations and dream imagery. You can think about these things in more than one way. But certainly throughout history there have been stories of the incubus and the succubus, and some of these may have been culturally filtered abduction experiences, and they just came out in terms of what the people could think of at the time, which would be like a demon, because we didn't have a concept really of extraterrestrials back then. But certainly people did believe in demons and spirits and so forth.
Okay, well, I'll share something with you. I never thought that a dream state could explain anything that would be reality-based, but I had this dream where I've been into UFOs for a very long time, watched hundreds of lectures. Anything about it, I can watch something that would bore the pants off of some people, but I get into it. And anyway, I had this dream. Outside my bedroom window, there is a overhang for a porch, and I can climb out there and stargaze some nights when it's warm. And I had this dream that my brother and I were sitting out there, and we saw these orbs in the sky. And I start pointing at them, and I'm like, "That is awesome!" And we're talking, and I turn to my brother, and I keep talking, and his eyes get big, and he dives in the window. And I turn up and look, and they're getting really close, really, really close. And I'm paralyzed for a second. I can't jump in the window, and that's all I want to do. And then I feel like a rubber band, like it's around my chest, and it stretches, and right about the time it feels like it's going to snap, I propel towards this light, and I get absorbed into the light, and I'm still traveling, and I can feel myself moving, and I end up like looking at, and this could completely be a dream, but I'm floating around this solar system. It's not a galaxy. It's not that big. It's a solar system, and I'm around this planet, and this light is talking to me, and I'm watching all these other big lights. They look like motherships, and they start to fade out, and there's these other different colored lights, and this light is telling me that we've been at war, we're dying, this and that, and then I get returned back to the port, or the overhang that we're standing on, and my brother's still standing next to me, and then basically I wake up. But anyway, that's a strange dream. It felt very vivid to me, but that's on a side note. I guess my next question for you would be, what is morphic resonance? Can you explain that to us?
Yes. Before I get into morphic resonance, I do want to comment on that dream. The dreams that experiencers have, and of course some of us don't know that we're experiencers, are very important because they are clues to the interactions that we're having that may not be accessible to our conscious memory. In the Barney and Betty Hill case, they had the period of missing time after seeing the UFO over the road, and Barney remembers seeing the beings through the windows of the UFO. But in the years afterward, before they actually went under regression and got recall of what happened on board the craft, they had vivid dreams of actually being taken on board, and those dreams were basically clues to what was buried in their subconscious. So any kind of dream, especially if it's a very vivid dream, and if you have a recurring dream, certainly that may be a clue, is definitely important. So whatever the case, keep an open mind about exactly what that dream was and what it means for you. Yes, go ahead.
Before we get into morphic resonance, real quick, I had one other one I'd like to get your opinion on. I went to sleep one night regularly, no problem, but I had this dream where I lived multiple lives, and it felt like it was very vivid, it was very real. I was a butterfly, I was a ant, I was a tree, and when I mean a tree, I mean I lived the tree. I grew. I could feel my roots going down into the ground. I felt dew on my leaves. Like I lived like all these lives, and then I was myself, and I lived my entire life. And then when I died, because I'm scared of death. This could have been a subconscious thing, but I died. And when I woke, I thought I was waking up, but I wasn't waking up out of the dream state. I was still dreaming. I was sitting at this table. I died as a human after living all these lives, and then I was sitting at this table after death with like 8 people surrounding this table, and we were all holding hands. Well, I jerked my hands back because I was scared. I didn't know what was happening, and they said, "Hey, we're creating all of this together. Come, experience more." And when I grabbed their hands again, I started experiencing another life. Anyway, I just wanted to share that with you.
That's a fascinating experience. I mean, definitely keep a journal of any of these vivid dreams you're having. I believe that we do live multiple lives. It's rare for people to describe, a life as, say, a butterfly or a tree or something like that. But who knows what our souls are capable of? So definitely that's something worth keeping notes on, and keep a lookout for other people's experiences or dreams that may have some parallels to that. It may be something like part of a shamanic initiation, which is an aspect of the UFO abduction phenomenon. It is connected with a variety of other kinds of experiences. I guess I'll get into kind of a brief definition of morphic resonance. It's a concept from a scientist named Rupert Sheldrake, and the idea is that basically the idea is nature is habit forming in a sense. That, for instance, once a particular ecological niche appears on a given planet, and species evolves to fill that niche, then if that species goes extinct, and maybe the ecosystem goes through some changes, it makes it more likely, though, that the same ecological niche will appear and another species will evolve to fill it. And so the idea has actually been that that's one way to explain why so many people report humanoids, because most of the beings that are described in abduction and close encounter cases are humanoid in shape. They have 2 arms, 2 legs, they stand upright, they have a head on top with a pair of eyes and a mouth. And so the idea is, if they're extraterrestrial, why would they have the same body shape? Because they could have had some completely different evolution. But if there are habits in nature that maybe once the first humanoid species appears on one planet, then other planets, it'll be easier for humanoids to evolve. That's one idea. That's the basic idea of morphic resonance, and probably if you read some of Rupert Sheldrake's books, he could give you a more detailed explanation of it. And along the same line, there's a concept in evolution which is not controversial in the sense that morphic resonance is controversial, but in evolution there's basically the idea of convergent evolution, and that's well established. That it's based on the principle that form follows function, and that there are limited number of solutions to any particular adaptive challenge which will be practical, which will actually work in the real world. And that means that, for instance, ichthyosaurs and dolphins, ichthyosaur is a prehistoric marine reptile that its ancestors lived on the land but then returned to the ocean. Dolphins are part of the whale family and the toothed whale family, and their ancestors actually dwelt on the land, and dolphins are a mammal. But the ichthyosaur and the dolphin have almost exactly the same body shape, and they both eat fish, they both swim in the ocean, and the body shape is simply due to the ecological niche that they occupy. And so a technology using species which has radio and builds spaceships and things like that, well, that is a particular ecological niche as well. So it's not necessarily so unlikely that other technology-using species would be humanoid. So that's to talk to you about the concepts of convergent evolution and morphic resonance, which is another possible explanation for why aliens may be humanoid in appearance.
Okay. Well, if reptilians are real, and I haven't experienced anything to the contrary to show me that they're real, but if they are real, I believe that civilization has rose and fallen many times. Maybe humans almost get extinct at one point, lose all their information, and then they come back. They climb back. Well, we have come a long way, in just a few thousand years that we've progressed, and technology in the last 200 years or 100 years has just skyrocketed. Could the reptilians be a dinosauric species that lived millions and millions of years ago and left planet and came back? And another question that I have about the reptilians, that's just a theory, possible theory that I have, but some of them have like shells, or they have a protective front, and that would signify that at some point they were either a warrior species or had open conflict. What are your thoughts on that?
Well, yeah, that's definitely some good questions. The idea that they are in some sense indigenous to the Earth, or that their ancestors evolved on Earth, that's certainly a possibility. Some people say that, well, something from another solar system wouldn't look like a reptile that we have on Earth. And to that, I say, well, no, convergent evolution, it could. But still, if they're from the Earth, then that would make it even more likely that they would look like something here. And I could imagine perhaps that at the end of the Cretaceous period, for which our fossil record is somewhat limited, we don't have fossils for every species that's ever existed, you could have a humanoid dinosaur evolve, and 66 million years ago, perhaps they developed an advanced technological civilization that had airplanes and trains, and maybe even went into space, or started building underground cities and so forth. And then 66 million years ago, the asteroid or comet comes along and crashes into the Yucatan and destroys basically the entire civilization and the ecosystem of the Earth. And the reptilians that survived, perhaps they live in habitats underground, artificial biospheres they created, or the ones that went off into explore other solar systems, they may have survived. And meanwhile, the biosphere on the surface of the Earth pretty much reset itself. And then over a period of the next millions of years, mammals evolved to fill some of the missing, to take the places of the dinosaurs, which had gone extinct. So it's, that's possible that you could have had a big civilization on the Earth back then. And there's going to be some evidence in the fossil record or in the geologic strata for that period of time. But recognizing that evidence for what it is and so forth, that's going to take some time, and you have to get the paradigm to the right place where people are actually looking for evidence of a lost civilization of that nature. Another possibility is maybe this happened in a parallel timeline, in the sense that the many worlds interpretation of quantum mechanics describes how you can have all these parallel histories happening simultaneously, and in one history, maybe the dinosaurs never went extinct, and a species of dinosaur evolved into intelligence. And if their technology is advanced enough, maybe they've discovered a way to travel interdimensionally into other timelines, and they've tunneled into our reality. So they could be from a parallel Earth where the dinosaurs never went extinct to begin with. Some of the information that has come, actually, reptilians have told people that we did evolve on the Earth, or that we live underground, and so those are actually things people have been told in some of the contact experiences with the reptilians, which is, why we need to explore some of these theories. And I'm sorry, was there another question you wished me to address? Oh, the warrior ancestry aspect. Yes.
Yes, with the hard shells and stuff. Yes, absolutely.
Definitely. Well, the reptilians basically have three types of chests that have been described to me, as far as the scales and so forth. Predominantly three main variations. There's just small scales on the chest in some cases, like the skin on the arms or the legs. It's the same sort of small, maybe marbly scales, or beaded texture in some of them. In others, they have these wide, what we call a ventral plate or ventral scale, that are similar to what you find on the belly of a snake. And it's just basically wide horizontal scales that give just kind of the appearance almost of horizontal ridges. And those may provide some measure of protection, a little more than just the small scales. But then you have the others that actually have what you would call a breastplate or a plastron, which looks like the shell of a turtle. And it's just like almost a hard, solid piece that covers the chest. But clearly it's made of the same kind of keratin skin covering as the rest of the scales, and it may even have bone structure underneath. So that kind of protection may suggest that they have a history of aggression, and that they need that body armor to protect themselves. And certainly they've told people that, in some cases, well, we are of warrior ancestry. I know someone who was in communication with the reptilian, and he had an image come to his mind of what that reptilian looked like in a life in the distant past, and it was almost like a Roman gladiator with a spear or something like that. So definitely apparently some of the reptilian species are of warrior ancestry.
I have a question for you. You've studied the reptilians, so I guarantee you're going to know more about this than I do, but I believe it's Rwanda or somewhere in Africa. There's a holy man or a healer, and he has information about the reptilians. Is that correct? I don't know, Mubambu, or I can't say the name correctly.
Credo Mutwa, and he was yes. He was
go ahead.
Okay. Shall I continue? Credo Mutwa was an experiencer. He had encounters with the Greys. He worked with John Mack in the 90s, and he spoke to David Icke, who we know for the reptilian conspiracy theories. But yeah, he talked about a race of humanoid reptilian called the Chitauri or Chitauri, which are a reptilian humanoid that reportedly lives under the ground in Africa. And that's just another reference to the possibility of them being natives of the earth in some sense and living here with us.
Okay. I have my next question for you is actually basically a three-parter, but they all go together. You'll be able to flow through the question. Some people, see, what I find very interesting is that even if some of these tales or some of these experiences are in the mind of the subject, like it never physically happened, something still very, very interesting happened, because some people are forever changed by these experiences, even on an emotional level and on a spiritual level. And when you answer this question, can you explain to us what a starseed and a soul group is?
All right. Well, yeah, the concept of a starseed is basically the idea of an extraterrestrial soul, or a person who has lived other lives, past lives, you could say, as an extraterrestrial, and that could be as a UFO occupant, what we would call the occupant of one of these craft that shows up in our skies and perhaps abducts people or interacts with people at least. And this back in the 90s, from 92 to the end of 97, Dan Wright of the Mutual UFO Network was director of a project called the MUFON Abduction Transcription Project. And over a period of about 5 years, they solicited tapes of hypnosis sessions and interviews from 19 or 20 hypnotherapists and researchers who were doing regressions with people who've had abduction experiences. And one of the common threads, Dan Wright, he identified 5 themes that seemed fairly common in all these cases, one of which was the interest of the entities in human sexuality and reproduction, which David Chace, of course, says is the central focus of the whole abduction phenomenon, and that's certainly a very important part of it. And another of the 5 themes was this idea of the subject having an alien connection. For instance, there were people that reported that on board the ship that the beings told them, "You are one of us." Or people have described feeling that the beings are in some sense their family. Or a deep sense that somehow I'm working with these beings in some other existence that's in some way parallel to this, or that people have come forward with past life memories, remembering being one of these kinds of alien beings. That's the idea of what a starseed is. And of course, there were even cases in which people remembered, for instance, they're picked up on board a craft, and then under hypnosis they're asked to say, okay, well, look at your own body, and they discover, oh my goodness, the body I'm in now is not my human body, it's the same kind of bodies that these beings have. So somehow their consciousness is either transferred to this body or on board the craft, maybe the craft moves interdimensionally and they shapeshift and become one of these kinds of beings. But there is definitely an alien connection that some experiencers have, which is what could be called in New Age terminology a starseed connection. And I consider myself a starseed, although I don't have any unambiguous memories of a UFO experience. It's just a feeling for me that I've always been, since the late 80s, have been drawn to this subject and have felt, when I hear stories about the Greys and reptilians and so forth, and when I see the drawings, there's just a sense of profound awe and familiarity, and like that's home. So for that reason, I consider myself a starseed. And of course, if I ever get regressed and then do recall a past life experience or something along that nature, then I'll have to question, is that just my imagination creating this because I've been so familiar with it through my research and so forth. And that's just one thing I may have to deal with at some point in the future.
Right on. Yeah. So all these different ETs, do you have a number, or is it per case? Like I know that some people have seen multiple ETs because they've gone to a craft or they've gone to a city. But how many different ETs do you believe are out there, or at least, I mean, that's a vast distance, but how about here, visiting here, the different kinds you've dealt with? How many variations on species have you physically dealt with in eyewitness testimony?
Well, that is an excellent question, and that question is kind of the whole focus of my research, in a sense, that I remember back in the early 90s, and back when I was reading Communion and Intruders and David Jacobs' book Secret Life, I was thinking well, maybe there's, maybe about 5 different species of aliens that are visiting the Earth, and you have your Greys and your maybe a hybrid species and your Nordics and a reptilian species and a little stocky blue being or something like that. Whitley Strieber described those stocky blue ones. But then I realized after interviewing people, talking to people about what they saw, getting details of their descriptions, I found that, well, yes, the Greys I saw, they had a hand with 5 fingers, and they had maybe little claws or something like that. And then this other person will describe, well, no, the Greys I saw, they had 4 fingers and no thumb and little bulbs on the tip of the fingers. Or the other person would say the Greys had 3 fingers and a thumb and very long dexterous fingers. So I was getting so many variations of what we had, what I had previously assumed was one species. That is clear, in humans, all humans you see on Earth, unless there's some kind of genetic deformity or birth defect or something, they're all going to have 5 well-formed fingers in the same configuration. But there are so many variations in terms of what people describe for the UFO occupants that based on our concept of species, you have to say, well, there are many species of Greys. The Greys are not just one species. Same with the reptilians, with the insectoids. There are many, many variations of what people call an insectoid, or the majority of which are described as resembling a praying mantis. So I'm going to have to say dozens and dozens and dozens of different species, and we don't even know if our concept of species applies to these beings because they are masters of genetic engineering. Ken Bacon is an abductee who has actually said that he believes some of these reptilian beings may actually tailor-make the genetics and the body for a particular soul who is going to inhabit that body for its lifetime. So you may have designer bodies for some of these reptilians. So it's almost as if each individual reptilian is its own species. So there are going to be a lot of different species. But what we do see is enough commonality that we kind of pigeonhole them, in a sense, in some major categories. Your Greys, your human-looking ones, mostly described as Nordic-looking, your reptilians, and your insectoids. Those are what I would call the 4 main categories, and then there's several other categories as well.
Now, since this is your main focus of your research, I guarantee this thought has come to your mind. But what if all these representation, or what if the ETs that they're seeing is actually a representation? Like if they can already manipulate our minds and they can, control us in certain ways, freeze our bodies, and why couldn't they send us a projection of themselves that we would feel more comfortable with? Like if it's a giant monster and would scare anybody, they could project itself to be a puppy to us. Like how hard does that make your work to try to nail down what species may be interacting with people?
Yeah, well, that does add another layer of complexity to it. We have, what for a long time, Bud Hopkins was, one of the first to identify what we call a screen memory, which is maybe someone's driving along a road at night and they have a memory of seeing a giant owl land on the road in front of their car, and their car stops, and the owl may be 4 or 5 feet tall. And they have an emotional reaction to this memory of seeing an owl, which is more than what you would expect from seeing an owl. And there are details of those memories which suggest that memory is not an accurate representation in their mind of what had actually happened. But certainly, there are many cases in which people will remember seeing an animal, such as a coyote, a deer, an owl, a raccoon, and that is the conscious memory they're left with after an experience. But then if they look back on it, they say, well, I had missing time in that experience, or that owl was larger than any owl could actually be, or details like that, or there were emotions associated with that experience. And I actually met someone in the 90s, one of my cases, a woman described, I forget if it was her experience or one of her daughters, I think it was hers. She was at a stream in the woods, and she looked across the stream, and there was a deer there, or actually maybe it was she looked and there was a little gray alien standing there, and she blinked her eyes and rubbed her eyes, and she looked again, and oh no, it's actually just a deer, so it's not an alien. And then maybe she I forget if she closed her eyes again, and then it was a gray. But there are these what we call screen memories, and some of the screen memories actually, for instance, if someone had a medical procedure done to them by some beings, they may be left with a disturbing memory of being kidnapped by a human being, and the human being did something to them that was disturbing. So some of the screen memories, they're not just animals, but they can actually involve the aliens taking on the guise of a human being. And it's this all, and then when you get into the idea of the MyLab scenario, which is what we call military abductions or covert ops abductions, which seem to involve some covert human group, then it becomes complicated. How do you sort those out, those actual covert human activity, from alien memories of the aliens masquerading as humans in some sense? And it does get rather complicated. You just have to ask questions, ask detailed questions, and listen to the details and look at the emotions the people are expressing, and you can kind of cut through some of that because there are patterns that allow you to recognize a screen memory versus what is an actual memory of a being, or what we assume to be an actual memory of a being.
Yeah, you mentioned the Nordics a little while back. I'd like to touch on the Travis Walton story just a little bit, if you don't mind. Basically, he was basically like a lumberjack, and he got abducted. I'll let you touch on that. But if anybody is familiar with the story and they happen to watch the movie Fire in the Sky, his actual experience was 10,000 miles different than what they actually showed in the movie. Can you go into that a little bit?
Yeah, certainly. I can. That was one of the first cases I heard of. I guess back in the early '80s, a documentary came out which used to air on TV and still does periodically, called "UFOs Are Real," and that was really probably my first serious introduction to the UFO phenomenon. They had Ted Phillips on there, who does the investigations of UFO landing traces. They had Stanton Friedman talk a lot throughout that documentary. They introduced the Barney and Betty Hill case, and they introduced Travis Walton. And Travis Walton was interviewed along with Mike Rogers, who was the crew boss on that logging expedition during which the abduction took place. Mike Rogers happens to be an excellent artist and painter, and did depictions of the aliens. And I remember seeing that depiction, Mike Rogers painting, along with Travis Walton's description of his experience, and I was just in awe, and I was just fascinated by that. But basically what happened, there's 7 men. Travis was one of them. Mike Rogers was another. They were driving home from work. It was, I guess the sun had just gone down or was going down, and they saw a light in the trees, and they thought maybe it was a forest fire. As they approached it, they saw, oh no, it's actually a craft, a flying saucer, hovering in the trees. Travis Walton hopped out of the pickup truck and approached the craft. He said just because he believed it was going to fly away quickly, and he wanted to get a closer look at it before that happened. And as he got closer to it, he realized that it wasn't flying away. And so the other men were shouting for him to return to the truck, and so then the craft started to move and make a loud noise, and so Travis got a little scared and said, "Okay, I'm gonna make a break for it and head back to the truck." And at that point, he stood up and turned to start running back to the truck, but before he could even do that, there was a bolt of light or energy, and he was thrown back through the air and knocked unconscious, and the other men thought that he had been killed, and they drove off. And when they returned, Travis, not long afterwards, Travis was gone, the craft was gone, and Travis was missing for 5 days. Now, what Travis remembered happening is he remembered after being knocked out, he remembers waking up on a table on board a craft. At first he thought maybe he'd been in a hospital, that maybe he'd been injured and was in a hospital. But then when he could see clearly, he was in pain, and he saw standing around him 3 smallish humanoids, about maybe close to 5 feet tall, maybe a little bit shorter. And they were, some people have described them as the Greys, but in Travis Walton's description and Mike Rogers' paintings, they're more of a whitish color, very fetus-like, large eyes. But unlike the Greys, which usually have a solid black eye, these ones had a round pupil and iris that were clearly visible, and they had a 5-fingered hand. And Travis jumped up off the table and tried to threaten them, and they kind of eventually decided, okay, they're going to back off, and they turned, and they all left the room. And then after they were gone, Travis left that room and was kind of walking around this craft trying to find a way out. He came into a room that was, that as he approached the center of the room, the walls seemed to get darker and stars appeared around him. And then at the center of the room, he sat down in a chair, and it was like he was sitting in the middle of space, because in the center of the room, the walls were black and there were stars. And at some point there was noise or something behind him, and he looked, and he could see in the doorway there was a man who looked like a human being, I guess 6 foot tall man with shoulder-length blonde hair, tan skin, wearing a blue uniform, a pretty well-built gentleman with a kind of a glass, almost fishbowl type space helmet. Travis went up to him, tried to talk to him. The man didn't say anything. He just smiled and led Travis out of that craft, which turned out to be parked in a larger hangar. He led Travis out of the hangar, down a hallway, and into a room where I think maybe 2 other males and 1 female of these Nordic-looking beings, because they had somewhat Scandinavian features, you could say, like Northern European, but the tan skin and the blonde hair. And they did not have blue eyes. I believe the eyes were more of a golden hazel color. And the female, I believe, produced something like a small mask that she put over his face, and then he went unconscious. And then his next memory was waking up on a road with the craft just hovering in the air above him, and the craft just shot up into the sky, and then he ran down into the nearest town and called his brother. But that's the basics of Travis Walton's experience. And so there was the small humanoids, which were fetus-like, somewhat resembling a Grey. You could call them a variant of a Grey, or perhaps a hybrid type in their appearance. And then there were these Nordic types. And then I've talked to other people who've seen Nordics. Sometimes, in one case, they said they were from the Andromeda system, which the witness took to mean the Andromeda galaxy, M31. And in another case, they were supposedly based on a planet called Gregorius in the Pleiades. But the Nordics often are 6 to 7 feet tall, even a little taller sometimes. Sometimes they have fair skin, very light skin, blonde hair. I think in the cases that I was working with, they were more of a tan skin, kind of like the ones Travis saw, but very mesmerizing, beautiful eyes, very kind of gentle demeanor, and a friendly experience.
Yeah, my top 10 list, would be the Travis Walton case, the Allagash, the Barney and Betty Hill. There's a few others that I really like. Have you heard of the? It happened in the woods, in the Aerojet, Sacramento, California. Donald Trump. Do you know that case where he was supposedly in the woods and they tried to abduct him and he fought them off? He was in a tree. Have you ever heard of that?
Let's see. Is it Cisco Grove? Is that the one?
No. This is a obscure UFO case. It's just one that I really like. But basically, all of these I find to be very credible. The Barney and Betty Hill one, Travis Walton especially. I mean, they thought they killed Travis and dumped him in the woods, and the sheriff started an investigation. All that stuff right there lends, great credibility to it. But the Allagash abductions, have you studied that case, and can you describe those ETs that I believe the Wiener brothers experienced?
Yeah, Jack and Jim Wiener, Chuck Rack, and Charlie Foltz. They were artists. They were just hiking and camping in the Allagash and canoeing, which is a wilderness area in northern Maine. And I believe it was 1976, and they saw they built a huge bonfire on the shore so that they would have a means, because the night was very dark, and they needed a way after they went out onto the lake to find their way back to the shore. So I guess they were going to go out and do some fishing and some canoeing, and they saw a light in the sky, which they saw I guess it got a little closer, and it was like a sphere with kind of a roiling plasma appearance to it, and one of them, I forget which one, actually tried signaling it with their flashlight, and then it seemed to respond, and then it started coming closer toward them, and then they all got scared and they started paddling away as quickly as they could, but then they realized it was actually coming close to them faster than they were going to be able to get away, and it shone a light down on them. And I think at that point they had missing time, although they didn't realize they had missing time until they got back to the shore and the campfire was out. And they had built this campfire to last several hours, and it just was down to embers. So I'm familiar. Basically, it was Raymond Fowler who did the investigation. He's also done the famous case of Betty Andreessen Luca, the Andreessen affair, and the Watchers. Since the four of them were artists, they produced a lot of great drawings from their memories of what the different beings looked like, which looked somewhat like a gray or somewhat insectoid. And there've been speculation as to whether maybe it was some kind of gray wearing a suit that gave it a more exoskeletal type appearance. But that's definitely a fascinating case, and it has 4 separate witnesses to it who were hypnotically regressed separately from each other. So it definitely has a lot of credibility.
And some of these stories actually have somewhat proof or somewhat evidence, like Betty Hill. She experienced, they told her they were going to be giving her a pregnancy test, and it was before hospitals actually you did that, a way to do a pregnancy test with a needle in the abdomen. If I'm recalling that correctly. Also, they gave her a star map. She saw a star map. Can you touch on this somewhat?
Yeah. Well, the star map was, I guess she was. Maybe they were waiting for the beings to finish up with Barney's procedures, so she had a chance to just kind of talk to the one that she called the leader, and they were having, Betty and the leader were having a conversation, and so she told him, well, I know you're not from around here, so can you show me where are you from? And he opened up the wall, and in the wall was like what I guess I don't know if it was something he pulled out or something she just looked in and saw, but it was like seeing a three-dimensional map of stars with lines connecting some of them. There were heavy lines and then broken lines, and that the heavier lines were supposed to be like regular trade routes, and then the broken lines were like expeditions or something like that. And basically, she looked at the map and she told him, well, I know I've heard that there are 9 planets, and and the leader was asking her, well, where can in order for you to understand where I'm from, you have to tell me where are you on this map. And she told him, well, I don't know. I don't recognize anything on this map. And so he put the map away and said, well, I can't explain where I'm from then. Later on, an amateur astronomer named Marjorie Fish created a 3-dimensional map of stars using beads on strings. And after a whole lot of effort looking at the map from different angles, eventually narrowing it down to just the stars that were most sun-like and most likely to have planets, or Earth-like planets anyway, she produced a near match of the map that had been drawn by Betty Hill. Now, Marjorie Fish, certainly, to hear her describe the experience of finding that match, it sounds very impressive. Out of all the patterns she tried, she found only one that really seemed to be pretty close to Betty Hill's drawing that Betty had done under hypnosis after this accounting of the experience, or right after coming out of hypnosis. Now, there's been question as to whether that match could be a coincidence. For instance, some researchers have said that Betty's map and that Marjorie Fish's interpretation matched angle for angle, line length for line length what Betty drew, and that's not exactly true. I think that's a bit of an exaggeration, but then does it actually go beyond probability? And I think it may be an important match. I can't say for certain. But in any case, then you have to ask, well, does that map tell us something about the means of interstellar travel that these beings are using? Because it almost, the logic of the map almost suggests that they're traveling slower than the speed of light, perhaps, which would explain why they're going from nearest star to nearest star, instead of just kind of randomly jumping about in space, as you could imagine a more advanced race might do. And so you try to analyze this, and unfortunately, I can't form any real conclusions. And we don't have enough cases of star maps and so forth to, especially where we actually seem to have some kind of match, to draw any firm conclusions. But it's certainly worth consideration as to what this map might mean.
Absolutely. I've got kind of a dreary look on what the ET phenomenon may be. It's almost, in my mind, the larger reality. My hypothesis is that we basically are in a petri dish, sort of. I believe we live in a biological, sociological zoo, because us being social, I believe, is a large component of it. But we basically live in a biological, sociological zoo, and these zookeepers, whoever they are, buzz in and out, pick up their cattle now and again, look them over, and return them. Lately or recently in the field, there's been a lot of like what you said, they experience benevolent love. Sometimes they show them disasters in the future and stuff like that. But that's my interpretation. What is your interpretation of the overall reality?
Everything. In the sense that there is a lot going on. There are they do use us. I mean, they use us. You could call it we're almost like a wildlife preserve that they harvest for genetic material. You could call it like a zoo or a farm in some sense, but I don't think it's like they're harming us. It's more like a symbiotic relationship. Obviously there is individual psychological harm to people who have to deal with traumatic memories as a result of these abductions and so forth. But that doesn't mean there's a hostile intent towards us. It's kind of a very complex picture. Are we coming up on a break?
Yeah, we're coming up real soon. I have to. If you'd like to take an 8-minute break right now, I'll play the announcements that are coming up. How would that do?
That would be great. I need to freshen up. I'll be back in a moment.
All righty. This is going to be some fabulous announcements coming up on the EEN network.
Hi, this is Karen Newman from the show About Oneness, and here's what's coming up on the Enlightenment Evolution Networks 1 and 2, starting on Monday, October 27th until Sunday, November the 2nd. Simply put, Rob Gautier, founder of the EEN and the host of the show that started it all, the Enlightenment Evolution Hour, has put together the greatest metaphysical radio network ever. 7 days a week, we have shows that will aid you on your path to enlightenment, evolution, and ascension. On EEN1, Mondays at 6:30 p.m. Pacific Standard Time, 9:30 p.m. Eastern Standard Time is Heart to Heart Talk Radio with your host, Daniel Scranton. Join Daniel and his featured guests discussing a wide variety of metaphysical topics. Daniel channels the Creators, the Hathors, Ophelia the Fairy, and Archangel Michael, and the latest, the Unicorn Collective. Daniel and his guests will take phone calls and questions, and it's sure to generate high-frequency discussions. You can find more about Daniel at his website, danielscranton.com, and also on Facebook. Go to the Events tab on Daniel's website to learn more about Daniel's upcoming events. On Tuesday at noon, also 3 p.m. Eastern Standard Time, please join hosts Megan Crandallmeyer and Rachel Archelaus for Radio Inspiration, Expression, and Abundance for their show Soulfulpreneur. Spiritual business specialists Rachel and Megan will bring you inspiring conversations with people who are living their soul purpose. Frequent guests include psychic mediums, channelers, coaches, artists, and authors. They end every show with psychic readings and business coaching. Your questions about your spiritual business or life purpose journey are welcome. Wednesday nights, 9 p.m. Eastern Standard Time, 6 p.m. Pacific, is the show that started it all, the Enlightenment Evolution Hour with host Rob Gautier. Rob channels Treb on the first Wednesday of each month and will take callers' questions. On the third Wednesday, we'll have special guests such as guest channelers and other metaphysical teachers. The other 2 Wednesdays are freestyle call-in shows to discuss whatever callers have on their minds. Tune in to Rob on Wednesday nights, and you can also find him at trebchanneling.com and on Facebook at the Enlightenment Evolution Network group page. Rob has 2 special announcements. Starting on Sundays from September 14th, trebchanneling.com offers hour-long meditation classes. Please go to trebchanneling.com to register. Another project near and dear to Rob's heart is the much-anticipated sequel to the groundbreaking film Tuning In, called Tuning In Now. The movie will feature channelers such as Daryl Anka and Bashar, Lee Carroll and Cryon, and our very own Rob Gautier and Treb. Tuning In Now will explore the amazing work of today's top channels and how they are helping to awaken the consciousness of the planet. The film is in fundraising stages at the moment, and with a contribution for as little as $15 all the way up to $50, you can help make sure that this film is made. Please go to Indiegogo.com, that's Indie, I-N-D-I-E, Gogo, G-O-G-O.com, and type in the search Tuning In Now 2. That's the number 2. Tuning In Now with the number 2. On Thursday nights, 9 p.m. Eastern Standard Time, 6 p.m. Pacific, join host Philip Malika with the Consciousness Evolution Hour. Join Philip and his special guests and co-hosts as they discuss the shift, ascension, timelines, metaphysical concepts, and the 5th dimension. Find Philip at the Consciousness Evolution 2.0 group page on Facebook and on YouTube. On Friday, The Earth Experience with your host, Kalina Angel, 9 p.m. Eastern Standard Time, 6 p.m. Pacific. The Earth Experience explores our soul's expansion through our human experience on Earth. Kalina will help you to navigate and expand through the exciting confusions that we are manifesting as new 5D beings. On Sundays, 2 p.m. Eastern Standard Time, 11 a.m. Pacific, join me for my show, About Oneness. About Oneness is a weekly radio program focused on celebrating the ongoing conscious awakening of our planet and our realization of oneness. My guest on November the 2nd is Robert Atkinson, author of Mystic Journey, Getting to the Heart of Your Soul's Journey. Robert Atkinson is a PhD and an internationally recognized authority in helping people to tell their life stories. He is the author of 8 books, professor of human development and religious studies, and the director of the Life Story Center at the University of Southern Maine. He will be live taking callers' questions. If you would like to learn more about my upcoming guests, as well as see many videos of channelings and teachings, you can go to aboutoneness.com. On the Enlightenment Evolution Network 2, join host Victoria Vives every Tuesday at 9 p.m. Eastern Standard Time, 6 p.m. Pacific, hosting Earth Sky People Radio, your bridge between heaven and earth. Subjects will include planet Earth becoming part of an intergalactic society, star seeds and extraterrestrial life, living in oneness with one another, with Mother Earth, and with life beyond the Earth, the Interstellar Alliance, also known as the Galactic Federation of Life, music, frequency and sound healing, question and answer interviews, shamanism, ancestral wisdom and the star nations, self-sustainative and regenerative living, and much, much more. Please go to victoriavives.com/radio, where she has details about the show and the network. Victoria's guest on the 28th of October is Core Love, the man that's had 300 near-death experiences. On Saturday evenings, 9 p.m. Eastern Standard Time, 6 p.m. Pacific, the Pied Piper and Texas Rebel hosting the show, Disclosure Now. Disclosure Now is the On the Edge of Our Seats show that covers all topics of disclosure, from the world's most famous and obscure UFO cases to cryptozoology, conspiracies, and all things that go bump in the night. Pied Piper started his journey in Michigan in 1993 as a preteen seeing Bigfoot and never could get enough in investigating all things paranormal. Texas Rebel is a wild Texas man who loves the same journey and has studied these things for years. Join them as they cover all things in the human experience that just cannot be answered by anyone. Starting on Sunday, November the 2nd at 4 p.m. Eastern Standard Time, 1 p.m. Pacific, The Resonance Intention, hosted by Neil and Sol Gar. The Resonance Intention show is dedicated to all things frequency and vibration. They showcase conscious musicians who infuse frequency into their music and have set out to uplift and raise the vibration of humanity through their music. They will have in-depth conversations with various artists about their passions, purpose, and personal journey that led them to where they are now. Additionally, they will routinely feature guests discussing the topics of free energy technology and the quantum modalities and technologies that are now coming into existence. The Resonance Intention is a platform for artists, musicians, and inventors to increase awareness of their personal approach in order to contribute to the paradigm shift we are currently within. And remember, you never have to miss any show on the Enlightenment Evolution Network 1 or 2. All shows are available to listen to again immediately after they air on playback. All right, back to the show.
All right, ladies and gentlemen, you've been tuning in to Disclosure Now, and tonight we have a special guest, David Chace, who is a contactee researcher and illustrator. David, my next question would be, I guess, for you to plug. If somebody has a very interesting contactee type situation, can they reach out to you? How do they reach out to you? And what are the upcoming events that you have going on soon?
All right. Well, there's nothing definitive right now as far as the near future. I do expect that I will be at Experiencers Speak, the 4th annual Experiencers Speak in Maine next September, I believe, if they follow the pattern of the past 3 years. But that's that's almost a year away. Periodically I do interviews and so forth, so there'll be more of these. Nothing really to plug right now. I guess I do want to revisit the subject of missing time and time manipulation.
Absolutely.
I will discuss that. The missing time is more of missing time. I think we understand fairly well just from all the research of how abductees describe this under hypnosis of when they've recovered the memories, and it's you don't need to have any ability to control time itself or to manipulate space-time or whatever in order to explain missing time. That is more of the kind of the psychological or psychic, even, as it seems to be a telepathic mechanism, manipulation of the mind of the experiencer that leads to the experience of missing time. Now, basically, missing time is remembered as continuous. For instance, someone may be sitting in the woods and they think that 5 minutes has gone by, but when they look at their watch, they realize it's been 2 hours, and they just can't explain it. But they don't remember a gap or anything like that. It's just they remember time as being continuous, but somehow the more time has passed than should have. Now, after regression, what they will recall was that they had typically an abduction experience. They saw a craft or a being and were taken aboard, had a whole series of procedures, and then were returned to their normal environment. In some cases, the beings who take them actually will manipulate their body to put them in exactly the same position that their body was in at the moment of onset of the missing time experience. And then the beings leave, the craft leaves, and within a few seconds, they simply forget everything that went on during the past 2 hours, say. And it's as if they take and their mind will return to the same thought that they were thinking at the onset of the experience. And so, after the fact, they just remember. They may remember seeing a UFO, and then the UFO seems to leave, and then they look at their watch, and suddenly 2 hours are missing. So it's like they kind of seamlessly stitch together the memory from the beginning of the experience to the end of it. So that is a manipulation of the experiencer's mind. Now, there is a phenomenon that some people have called gained time. That's the term I use for it. There's been other terms for it, but it's a situation where someone actually realizes that, well, it should be 7 o'clock now, but it's only 6:30, and wait, wasn't it 6:30 half an hour ago? And that's the kind of experience where, or for instance, someone's driving and they know that it takes at minimum 45 minutes to make a drive from point A to point B, just from past experience or from the distance on the map. And they look at their watch and they discover, wait a minute, I completed that drive in 15 minutes. How is that even possible? And it doesn't seem to be physically possible. So those are situations I would call gained time. And that is where you have to bring in the idea of actually either the craft picks the person up, takes them to a timeless realm or another dimension where time passes differently or something, and then returns them perhaps even at the same moment that the abduction began. Although we really don't have nearly as good an understanding of what happens during these gained time experiences as we do with missing time. Because missing time, we have many, many cases where people have described this, where they've described what happens with their memories under hypnosis and so forth. In gained time, all we have for the most part is just conscious memories. I think there may be a couple cases where people remembered something under hypnosis, being abducted and being returned at the same moment as the initial abduction occurred. In a couple cases, maybe even seeing themselves. But those gain time things are fairly rare. But there is a suggestion that some of the beings have the ability to actually travel in time or move into another state of being or dimension or realm where time passes a little differently or something like that. So it's two separate phenomena. There's the mental manipulation or the psychic manipulation that alters a person's memory, and that leads to the missing time experience, whereas the gained time or the manipulation of time itself is something separate.
Right. The only time I have now I haven't specifically researched cases with gain time, but there was this wasn't necessarily a UFO topic either, but there was a guy that was flying his plane, and he went into some sort of a vortex, and he traveled a much farther distance than he should have, and he actually had more fuel on board than he should have been able to use, and even a tailwind or whatever term they call that didn't explain that. I'd like to ask you about one more case real quick if we have enough time. Do you recall the UK? This was a abduction type event in the UK. An officer was driving during a normal patrol, and he saw like something the size of a Volkswagen in front of him, and there was a bright light, and there was actually physical evidence on him. Have you investigated that case or researched it?
I'm trying to remember. Is that Alan Godfrey?
Yes, I believe you're correct.
All right. Yeah, I've read about that case, and I've seen him interviewed on television or YouTube. I don't know too much of the details. I do remember that there were some small beings that were, I think, similar to what we'd call a gray, so it may be a variant of a gray. And then there was one that looked almost human that had kind of like a widow's peak or perhaps a skull cap that he was wearing, and had almost like even a little like a goatee or something, if I remember the case correctly. But I'm not really an expert on that case. I do believe that's an important case, and there was another situation where Alan Godfrey was involved in investigating a mysterious death that seemed to have a paranormal aspect to it, and was
that where they was that the case where they found the guy on the coal mound?
Yeah, that's the one. And that's the thing is, like, back in the 60s when we were first learning about this phenomenon, it was assumed that if aliens actually did come and pick people up, it was more like just a field biologist out in the woods, and he sees a deer and he wants to study it, so he tranquilizes it, he examines it, measures it, and then lets it go. But now we realize it's not a random encounter between, based on, especially on the research of Bud Hopkins and David Jacobs and Yvonne Smith and John Carpenter and others. It's not a random finding a human being, picking them up. It's actually the people who have these experiences. It's more of a tagged animal sort of thing, where they have this again and again throughout their lives, usually starting in childhood or even infancy. And it turns out that it runs in families. Typically, one or both of the parents will be abductees as well. And then, of course, many of these people eventually will you find out there's this whole starseed element that, in addition to the genetic following of the family line, some of the people who are experiencers will recall having a past life as one of the aliens of this, maybe the same group that's abducting them, or having some connection to those beings, some sense of being connected with them or being part of their family in some sense.
So out of all the eyewitness testimony that you've collected and stuff, is there some sort of a structure, like bosses, workers? Some people have said that the Greys are like drones. And if they are like drones, if they are created in some way, would they be like biologic AI? How would you describe that?
Well, that's a great observation. The grays are, in my opinion, there are many kinds of grays. Some of them, for instance, there are beings that resemble grays, but on close inspection, you find they have small scales. They may have vertical slit pupils and a yellow iris. So those beings might be a gray reptilian hybrid, or they may be a species of gray that is in some sense descended from a reptilian species. You may have other grays that are much more human-like. Some people believe they are actually human fetuses that have been artificially gestated and brought to maturity while they still retain somewhat fetus-like proportions. Bill McDonald, a researcher in California, called them the neonates. Basically, they are a developmentally modified human being, and that one of the workforce of these neonates is actually being manufactured from human beings in the abduction phenomenon. And then you may have the possibility, it's been suggested, some are from a parallel reality or time travelers from our future that are a modified, evolved form of human that have taken on these fetal-type proportions, and that could happen through a process called neoteny or heterochrony, where the genes which control the timing of development have changed. You have also got the suggestion that some of the grays may be descended from insect-like beings, or may be the result of past hybridization experiments between insect-like mantis beings and humans. So I think the grays are many things. The small workers, in some cases, yes, they do seem to be specifically engineered for the role that they serve as workers. And they do seem biological, though. They don't seem, there are exceptions. That some seem actually like robots. I know of a case where one was actually described as like kind of a perfect little mechanical with silvery metallic appearance robot. But for the most part, I think they're a biological entity. But some are just engineered specifically to serve as workers, and I don't think they can reproduce. They work cooperatively with each other with no rank very efficiently. Of course, they can still be surprised if something comes up that's not part of their normal routine. They may get confused and not know what to do, and they'll either confer with each other, or they may just stand there dumb and wait for instruction from their higher authority, which may be one of the tall grays, which is one of the beings that is possibly capable of reproduction and is actually the species behind the grays and the intelligence behind them.
Okay, well, we have about 12 minutes left of the program here. I don't know if you have enough time to touch on this or not, but I spoke of this earlier. There was an entity that tried to trick a female, and he kept coming to her in different forms and as different entities and stuff. Could you tell us a little bit about that before we run out of time?
Yeah, if it's the case that I think I know which you described. I've done a drawing of showing a being that is a white-colored reptilian being with a pair of curved horns, little horns on his forehead, almost like a idea of what a demon might have for horns. And the woman's understanding is that this is not necessarily his true form or what he really looks like. He would come in different guises. For instance, he would pretend to be she's in a relationship with a reptilian, and that's another whole aspect of this phenomenon, is the relationship sometimes as lovers, and sometimes that's due to a past life connection that people have with some of these, particularly the reptilians. But he would actually disguise himself to try to make her think that she's him. But he is a different reptilian, apparently, and he might take on the form of a human she knows or some other appearance. And the shape-shifting that they do is almost perfect. Whether it's done by manipulating the minds or actually physically changing the shape of their bodies and rearranging their atoms through some kind of interdimensional technology or paraphysical ability, whatever it is, it can really fool people into thinking that this is who it is. But she would recognize him because his when he would take on a different form, he could never do it perfectly, and perhaps even psychically she could feel that this is a different vibration, a different energy, not the same being. But yes, this whole aspect of shape-shifting within the particularly the reptilians, but others, the Greys certainly do it. The Greys will use screen images. I've talked earlier about screen memories. I think of screen memories as a memory people are left with after the fact. When I talk about screen images, I think that's something they do in real time, where they may in real time try to convince you that they are an owl or a different kind of entity or a human, something other than what they actually are. And of course, the screen memory is just an after effect of the screen image. How the screen memory is actually created and so forth, we don't actually know, and it may be closely connected. And how the shape-shifting works, that's something we don't understand. Is it a technology? Is it something interdimensional? Is it a psychic projection? There's so many aspects to this phenomenon that we just don't have the means of discerning exactly what it is that's going on.
Absolutely. What are your thoughts on the 1950s contactees? I realize that you didn't start investigating till the mid-'80s, or early '80s. What are your thoughts on the old contactees, like from the 50s and the 60s and stuff?
Well, yeah, I mean, the first time I met an experiencer of close encounter abduction, of actually seeing a being, I mean, I guess in college I probably met a couple people who had seen UFOs, but it wasn't until 1991. I was in college at the time, but like when I was coming home during the summer and whatnot, I met Garnett Doonan, and that was in 91, and she referred to herself as a contactee. I guess she did not like the term abductee, because certainly Astartlia, the light being, or hybrid, or whatever she was that Garnett was interacting with, was a very friendly being, a very loving being, and Garnett didn't feel like Astartlia was abducting her. But there has been this whole debate over the term contactee versus abductee, because contactee kind of became a bad word for a while, particularly in the 80s and the early 90s, when the abduction researchers like David Chace and Bud Hopkins were trying to distinguish themselves from the old contactee cases. Now, in the 50s, we had cases of people like George Adamski, Daniel Fry, George Van Tassel, and I hope I'm getting all those names correct. There were several of them who would go to places like, for instance, there was the Giant Rock in California, where they would hold little UFO conferences, and you know, I may be combining some of these different contactees together in this kind of short version of it, but basically they made pretty far out claims about benevolent space brothers coming and wanting to discourage us from the nuclear wars, that we were always developing nuclear weaponry. And some of these cases, in my opinion, may have genuinely been actual contact with extraterrestrials, or whatever you call these beings, interdimensionals, time travelers, whatever they are. For instance, like these Nordic type beings, or maybe beings who are taking on or presenting the appearance of Nordics just to convey their message. And some of these cases may have been hoaxes. But I guess it made it, just the claims and the way the contactees presented themselves made it difficult for certainly a lot of people, more scientifically minded people, to take them seriously. And so for a long time, the abduction researchers felt like this was kind of a burden that they had to get out from under the perception of alien contact as being kind of hokey and whatnot. So my opinion is that some of those cases may have been genuine, some were probably hoaxes, but I would have to defer to people like Jerome Clark and the late Richard Hall, who did a lot of investigations of those people.
Excellent, excellent. Well, David, you've been very knowledgeable on this subject. I'm glad I had you on. You've been a great guest. Is there any other parting messages you may want to give anybody that may be listening? Maybe, I don't know if you continue to take eyewitness testimony or not, but if there's any way anybody could get a hold of you or pass messages along, you go ahead and say that now.
Yes, all right. Well, for the most part, my social media experience is limited to Facebook. And I'm on Facebook. You can find me, let's see, my page is just facebook.com/David W. Chace. Remember, Chace is actually C-H-A-C-E, not C-H-A-S-E, and a lot of people mistake that. And then there is a page that I help manage. Actually, my friend Bridget, who I talked about earlier, she had the contact in the 1990s with the reptilian she nicknamed Captain. So Bridget and I together, we manage a page called Positive Reptilian Contact on Facebook, which is just facebook.com/Positive Reptilian Contact. And you could probably find me through either of those avenues. If you go onto YouTube and you just type in David Chace, again, C-H-A-C-E, and David Chace UFO, you can find some of my presentations. You can find my Experiencers Speak presentation that I did in September of this year when I was in Maine, which I go through several illustrations showing pretty much what all the main types of aliens are. You can find interviews that Brenda Astorino did with me last summer, 2013, and some little videos showing some of my drawings. So that's basically how to get in touch with me. And I don't friend a whole lot of people on Facebook, but I do keep my messages available. So if you message me, I'll try to get back to you. In addition to, Facebook has the messages divided between the inbox and the other box. I check both of them, so if you can't get into my inbox and it says it'll send it to my other box, well, I'll check that too. So don't worry about that. I'll check the messages and try to get back to you.
All right, that's excellent. Well, you've all been tuning in to Disclosure Now. I was your host, the Pied Piper, and we had a guest on tonight named David Chace, and he's a contactee researcher and illustrator specializing in the study of alien beings. We are glad to have you on, and everyone, you have a good night.